Happy Saturday. Good evening. Welcome to Custom Virtual Presents Full Circle. Tonight, we're going to focus on the highs and lows of running. If you're just joining us for the very first time, a couple of thank yous right off the top. Big thank you to Wendy Nguyen and the entire team at Custom Performance here in New York City for putting this evening together. And of course, for being there and being a driving force for the running community, especially during what I think we can safely say have been some very unique times. So it's been comforting to know that Custom has been there as Custom Virtual, still being able to reach out, talk to us about great physical therapy practices, give us things we need to keep our running in line. Also the virtual bread and butter classes, which we can talk about in a little while. But Custom Performance really does set the standard for what great physical therapy is all about and for what someone who supports the running community is all about. So big thanks to the team at Custom Performance. We have two incredible panelists joining us tonight. So 2 weeks ago, we sat down with Dr. Kathleen Gassner and Dr. Andrew Rosen, and we talked about RED-S, and that's something we're going to focus on again tonight. And the theme 2 weeks ago was full circle, talking about bone health and stress on your performance. And it was an incredible conversation. We had a special guest that even popped up mid-conversation. So tonight, we're going to build upon that. So let me quickly introduce the two panelists that we have with us tonight. Our very first panelist has been a mainstay at New York Custom Performance since 2016, where she has been a physical therapist there. She's also certified in Pilates. She's a certified RRCA run coach. And something that I admire about Kathleen, and this kind of ties into what we're going to talk about tonight with RED-S, is that, you know, she doesn't just treat the running injury. She wants to treat the whole runner. And by doing that, one of her passion projects has been to really spend a lot of time focusing on RED-S. This is a subject matter she's very passionate about. She spent a lot of time studying it, and it's something that she has called upon to speak about not only here in New York City, but throughout the US as well. And my goal is to take her, you know, global, because I want to get her out there and I want to talk about RED-S on a global front. On a personal note, I've always said I'm very lucky because I have this incredible team that I get to work with day in and day out. And when it comes to guiding me from a physical therapy standpoint and from a coaching standpoint, Kathleen sets a very high standard. She's taught me to be a smarter runner, a stronger runner, and something that I always remind myself of when I'm having perhaps even a high or a low from running is to always trust the process. And that's thanks to Kathleen's guidance. So Dr. Kathleen Gassner. Kathleen, great to have you joining us tonight.
Thanks, Stephen.
My pleasure. I know your husband is somewhere building something at this moment. We'll ask him to keep it down. No hammering in the background tonight. Hopefully he can take 30 minutes off this evening.
Hopefully.
Hopefully so. Our second guest tonight, this guy's just an incredible guy. He's a personal trainer. He's a coach at Mile High Run Club. If you tune into the Custom Performance virtual bread and butters, he normally pops up at least 1 or 2 days a week hosting our bread and butter classes. On top of that, he's also a coach for Streets 101, which is based out of New York Custom Performance. Something he probably won't tell you about himself because he's a fairly humble fellow. He's part of the Sub-3 Marathon Club, which is no easy task. He's also a Boston qualifier. And something I really admire about him is that he's an open book. He's very transparent when it comes to the highs and lows of running. And I will just say this, if you think his name is Ted, then you don't know Tim. So please welcome Tim Downey. Tim, great to have you join us as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, appreciate that. For those of you on here, you've made it far enough. My name is Tim.
Something also I like to point out about Tim, when the weather is at least 48 degrees or above, Tim tends not to wear a shirt. And Tim, thank you for finding a shirt tonight and throwing that on for this conversation. We'll see if you keep it on for the entirety of our panel this evening.
After 8 o'clock, all bets are off.
Well, luckily we have to wrap this thing up by about 8 o'clock. So let's dive in. Really, thank you both for being here. And Kathleen, tonight you're going to take on dual roles because I'm going to look toward you as not only a medical expert, especially when it comes to looking at RED-S. I'm also going to rely on you from a female athlete perspective as well. Tim, you only have to worry about being the male athlete in this conversation. Although I have a little news I'll share with everyone later about perhaps your next chapter and the journey that you're currently taking. So Kathleen, I want to start with you. You know, 2 weeks ago when we sat down with you and Dr. Rosen, you know, we talked about bone health and we talked about stress and how that relates to performance. Just to kind of recap that a little bit, can you give us that overview again of what Red S is all about and what that means?
Sure. So the old terminology was the female athlete triad. Old because it's no longer just the triad, and with Tim being here, it's no longer just for females. So relative energy deficient in sport syndrome is the new syndrome or the new diagnosis. And the idea here is it incorporates all of the body systems. So yes, bone health is something we deal with a lot with female athlete triad, but now we're starting to learn what are the signs, what are the symptoms that you can notice beforehand to prevent you to getting to that complete downward spiral, as I would call it, of a stress fracture. So relative energy deficient in sports.
Relative energy deficient in sports. And I still remember the very first time you and I talked about this, and it was kind of early on where you had really started to make this a passion project for yourself. And at first I remember you gave me some information and I took a look at it and I thought, well, this really just mostly applies to female athletes. But then you very, very quickly realized, no, I meet 5 or 6 of these things as well. This is something that's equally as important for both male and female athletes. And the more we've had a chance to discuss it, the more I've certainly learned, and very thankful for that. Tim, I want to turn to you. You know, something I find interesting with runners is we all have these unique stories. You know, perhaps we ran in high school and we gave it up for a while, or if you're like me, I didn't start running until much later in life. You know, as a runner, what's your journey been? You know, when did you discover running? Did you love it at first? Was it an escape? You know, kind of give us a little of that history.
I began when I got into high school, moving around a few different places growing up. And when I got to small town Michigan as the final stop, there was a small group, 7 of us guys, all, for lack of better terms, misfits. You know, we weren't part of the in crowd. We didn't play football. We couldn't catch a ball for our lives. So we all kind of stuck to running. And there was one of the guys, his coach, his dad, Mr. Henning. He took us under his wing, and for 4 years, more or less 7 days a week, we ran cross country, we ran track, but he was really our coach. And that was kind of, you know, it was my first kind of feeling of like a home base. So I picked up running in high school, and then I went to college and, for lack of better terms, visited a few different outlets in life. You know, I still maintained a little bit of fitness, but I started to go more to the gym. Lifting weights was more of my thing, and running became a little bit of a backseat program. And then, you know, I was fortunate. I was able to travel and live abroad through school, as well as made it over to China. And there's not a lot of gyms when you go to some of these other places, you know, that you can just jump into. So running quickly came back. And then, you know, I think, what did I move here and when I was 22, and, you know, I kind of fell into this, what is running, what is working out, you know, welcome to New York City, go let it rip for 5 years. And I did. And then it's been about 4 years, I think, 4.5 years ago since I decided I was going to run my first marathon. That was the same year that Mr. Henning, my coach from high school, had passed away suddenly due to cancer. And that was kind of the spark that, you know, I realized life's a little bit more important than just, you know, seeing the sunrise at a New York City apartment. So decided to kind of put a little why behind my fitness, why behind my life, I guess, in general. And here we are 4.5 years later, still running, still like marathons.
What was the first marathon you ran?
First one, well, the first unofficial one I ran was actually the 5-borough pizza challenge, where you eat a slice of pizza in each borough. Came out to about 27, 28 miles, but that had no clock. The first official marathon would have been 2 months later, Philadelphia Marathon. And I don't know the year, 2016, 17, I don't know. The
year is not as important. I mean, first of all, I come from a family of educators. So to hear someone say that a teacher made a positive impact on your life, it makes my heart smile. And I think a lot of us on this call would agree with that. So what a wonderful way to represent and to, you know, kind of pay tribute to the memory of Mr. Henning and him as a coach and him as a mentor for you. Not to get into the race specifics for that Philadelphia Marathon, but did you enjoy the experience? What did you feel that day? What was it like when you crossed the finish line?
Yeah, it was, I will say I went out and, you know, I had run that was the longest I'd run that training cycle, you know, above 15 I'd never done before. So I don't remember too much of the race. I distinctly remember looking at my watch when it crossed to 20.01 and being like, well, whatever happens, I've run the farthest I've ever run in my life at this point. And I think that's something that's kind of always stuck with me. I love pushing myself. I love PRs, you know, but kind of realizing that, you know, pushing myself to a limit that's not really based on this societal time frame or PR spectrum, you know, and kind of realizing, hey, this is already an accomplishment, you know, so just keep putting one foot in front of the other. When I finished, of course, then I was like, well, now I only have one next goal, and that's to break 3.
That's a very admirable goal too, which you did accomplish, I believe, if my memory serves, 2019 at the LA Marathon. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And that one was, that was another good one. I had my brother out there at the time, and he spontaneously decided to run a marathon with me because I don't remember a lot of my marathons. I remember that moment and this moment when he told me he wanted to be running, knowing that I was going to cross the line at 3 hours. So I didn't have a lot of options at that race. I had to cross the line before 3 hours.
Was he prepared to run a marathon, or was this just like, oh, hey, bro, you're showing up, let me just jump in and run with you? Because these are things we probably shouldn't talk about during this, but
yeah,
I see Kathleen in the corner just shaking her head.
Kathleen probably would have visited him, or he probably would have visited Kathleen shortly after. But no, you know, I did the training, he did the mental marathon. Let's put it that way.
Well, Kathleen, I want to turn over to you for just a second. You know, Tim shared a couple of high moments with us, and I always think it's nice. I mean, tonight we really will focus on both the highs and lows of running. And Tim just shared 2 high moments with us, that very first marathon. And I think all of us, that first marathon experience is maybe at the time we don't realize it, but when we look back, we have to say that was pretty daggone incredible. And then also that moment that Tim was able to achieve, which is breaking 3, which is no easy task. I know the work that goes into that. What are some high moments for you as a runner?
So I probably have 2 big high moments, and I'll say the marathon, it would be number 3. Finishing the New York City Marathon was probably number 3, but my first was winning counties in the 400-meter hurdles in high school as a sophomore. That was a very great moment, and I still, even though I'm not a sophomore in high school anymore, I still remember it very vividly. And the first time I was on the podium, 3rd place in my 3rd triathlon, Olympic distance triathlon. So those are my 2 highest points as an athlete, as a runner. And obviously finishing the New York City Marathon was an absolute incredible experience. But I'm learning that I love shorter distances way more, being more competitive in shorter distances, and I'm okay with that.
What year was your first New York City Marathon?
My first was 2018.
Oh, nice.
I believe.
That was a beautiful.
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, 18.
2018. Yeah, Wendy has confirmed. Wendy keeps track of your stats a little better. That was an absolute gorgeous, gorgeous year. And then now Elizabeth's saying 2017, so I don't know.
It was one of those.
The bottom line is you ran the New York City Marathon, which I know a lot of us on this call can say, well, we know tons of people have, but really when you look at it, not that many people globally can say they've run the New York City Marathon. So, and then which county? Number 1 in the county in the 400-meter hurdles. Which county?
For Nassau County on Long Island.
Nassau County. Are you on a plaque somewhere? Is like your name
forever? My face on a lot of old newspapers and a plaque buried somewhere deep in my parents' basement.
I have a feeling Mom and Dad still have copies of those newspapers somewhere. Somewhere. So both of you have some incredible highs. I want to start with kind of building upon the highs we were talking about. Going back to Red S and knowing that it is something that affects male and female athletes in some ways the same, in some ways on different levels. One of the big things I think we've talked about a little bit is hormones and how that plays into it. And looking at you as both a female athlete and a medical expert, you know, is that something that you can expand upon for us?
Yeah, so that's why it was female athlete triad for such a long time, right? hormone changes are a lot easier to notice in females, especially with their period. And I can remember from a very young age, really when I was running in middle school and high school, it was super cool to be a runner and not have your period. And it took a really long time, obviously, for me to realize, hey, that's not a cool thing. There's a reason why that's happening, you know, and there's other things that are lacking. So one of the things that I speak to a lot of women about with this issue is that if your body doesn't have enough protein and enough estrogen for you to have a regular menstrual cycle, that means that there's not enough protein and hormones for your other body functions, right? We think of hormones very much as male and female, but everybody has hormones that are important for your brain function, for digestion, for any type of endocrine function, so any of your glands, your pituitary glands, and it creates all these feedback loops that turn on different systems you need for your body. For bone health, for your cardiovascular health, for your heart to pump, you need certain hormones to be able to turn on. So one of the really important things to remember with this is that when your hormones are out of whack as a male and as a female, there are signs that you can pick up on. Usually for women, if the sign is that you've lost your period for some point of time, that means there's a lot of other systems that are lacking that happened earlier in this kind of spiral.
And what are some things that could contribute to that hormonal imbalance?
So, you know, a lot of people like to think about it as a diet issue, you know, not eating enough calories. And yes, there's some truth to that. But the other part of that is maybe you're eating enough calories for your function of X, right? Your athletic schedule and your racing and your training. But there's other things in your life that come along that still need more energy, right? So if you're not taking in enough calories or you're using too much fuel going to work, regular stress, right? Stress is a huge issue with hormones. If you're not sleeping enough, then your body doesn't have the time when you're sleeping to make the actual hormones that you need. So for that reason, there's all of these other things that can happen that's kind of eating away at your hormone supply. And that's when we start to see a change in your athletic performance, a change in your bone density. A lot of people will start to have some negative effects cardiovascularly. You know, I'm just not as conditioned as I was 3 weeks ago, even though I'm further into the training cycle, respiratory rate, all those kinds of things.
Thank you so much. And that's such a great overview. And again, like we talked about earlier, this is something that applies to all athletes. And I think pretty much everyone on this chat right now and everyone who will watch this down the road on IGTV, if you're honest with yourselves, you've experienced one or two, if not more, of those symptoms. Tim, just looking at you, does any of this sound familiar? Does any of this ring a bell to you? Has there been moments where you were like, I had no idea that's what it was, but oh, it all makes sense now?
Yeah, I mean, I checked every box, and just quick backstory. I mean, for those who don't know, Kathleen is also the one who takes care of me and keeps me in line as well. And, you know, our first conversation, I was pretty open about it. You know, I think what I first noticed was probably within the hormones is just the irritability. And while my fastest marathon was LA, I think it would be safe to say that probably as an overall health standpoint was not my best marathon. You know, I've always in the past struggled with eating disorder issues and, you know, kind of a body dysmorphia here and there at times. And I think once I kind of went headfirst into training for LA, you know, it was like, I wasn't counting calories necessarily, but I also wasn't, as Kathleen mentioned, accounting for the stress, accounting for the daily movement, accounting for all the extra work that my body was doing. And as what my job is, a coach, and I'm on my feet 10 to 12 hours a day, you know, I would account for what do I do with strength training and running, not necessarily accounting for what am I doing with the rest of my day too. So I think, I mean, if I look back, at the time I had no clue. All I wanted to do was break 3. There was nothing else to it. But at the, you know, looking back, it's, you know, very clear. irritability, living in, isolation. I was living in isolation before quarantine started. It was great. And then, with my only focus being to one particular goal, I kind of put aside everything else that life had going on. So I irritability first, hormones for sure. I mean, I couldn't concentrate. I had thought about taking courses, going to class, and, I was really just not able to do multiple things with my life. I was really strictly a running focused human being for about 12 to 18 months. And the other hormones that come with it too were certainly down. And, I think they all kind of compiled. I never gave my body a break. I won't recommend this to anybody, but, I ran for a year straight. That's not healthy. So there's a laundry list. We could tell you guys that one offline, but Kathleen has it. I have it. Things not to do while running. And, it's really helpful, to bounce ideas off of with her as well as other folks, to kind of look back and see what were the big issues that kind of came from it.
Well, it goes back to something that you and I have certainly talked about, and Kathleen and I have talked about, the three of us have talked about, which is, as a runner, as an athlete, there's learning how to be stronger in whatever your discipline is, be it running, biking, swimming, depending on what it is that you prefer to do as a kind of an athletic outlet, but also how to be smarter. And sometimes we concentrate on the strong and we don't necessarily concentrate on the book side of things.
Right.
And I know that it's a valuable lesson, and you're so good about talking about that experience. Thinking about the highs for you, that Philadelphia Marathon, that LA Marathon, you've had some lows as well. Was there a point where running just was no longer fun? Running became some competitive beast on your shoulders, for lack of a better phrase, and consumed you? Was there a point that it got to that for you?
Yeah, what year is 2020? I guess it would have been 2018.
I'll stop you. I think it's 2020. I'm not sure.
Days and years are.
We had 29 days in February, 312 days in March, and I think it's
we're close to April now.
Maybe it's May. I don't know. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, once as much as I love running and as much as it's done a lot for me, and I've met some of my best friends, the best people in my life. And I have a great support system with family and friends. I also have an addictive personality, and that's something that started back when I was 14. So once you asked, like, what was my thought from the marathon? And as soon as I crossed that line, I remember telling, I had my brother run it, I had a friend run it, and I remember being like, I'm going to break 3. And I'm an all or nothing type of guy. So there wasn't really like, oh, okay, why don't you go sit down with somebody, figure out how to do this? Like, that's why I try not to be my own coach. I'm not my own coach anymore. I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. And I started to lose, I ran the next year, ran a marathon. That was cool. And then I got really close, for lack of better terms. I got to within 15 minutes, and I was like, that's close, I guess, for me. Not really close, but, and that's when I really just kind of turned it on, and I shut out a lot of people. I shut out, it certainly ruined relationships 4 years ago and onwards of friends and whatnot. And it also kind of hindered with work. It was like, I almost thought, what's a job I can have where I can train? If I can't train while working, or like if work won't allow me time to do what I want to do, which at the time was 3 to 4 hours of training a day, then I won't work that job. So yeah, there was about, 18 to 24 months straight through of essentially, I wasn't addicted to, I wasn't using something, but I was addicted to running. And it was the same negative effects that, an addict would have of anything else.
Kathleen, when in your experience, I mean, is this something that you see that's actually kind of common that maybe we don't talk about as often, which is, we talk about being addicted to different substances or things or other vices, but for some of us, running is a vice in some ways, and you can develop an addiction You know, Tim mentioned, you know, he was working out 4 hours a day. Obviously, all of that not running, but you start to add that on layer and layer and layer, day after day, week after week. It adds up. Is this something that is fairly common? And obviously, is this something that contributes to what we see with Red S?
Yeah, so I would say, especially for men, it's a very early sign that kind of obsessive single track thinking. You know, we've all spoken about this a lot. Running is a huge part of my life. It's my job, it's a passion of mine, but running isn't my life. And it takes a long time to get to that healthy point. When running becomes such a part of your life that everything else, your family is hindering, you know, your running, your work schedule, you know, like doctor's appointments, other things that you have to do in your life, that's a great sign of, all right, hold on. Do I really feel this way? Would I really not want to go to that family picnic, or would I really not want to hang out with my friends normally? Or is there some type of imbalance that's going on? I can say from a personal standpoint, as an adult after high school, but as an adult, my most successful athletic years, so, you know, 10Ks, triathlons, I was racing pretty consistently, was probably the year that I lost the most friends, that I grew furthest from my family, even though I was actually still living with my parents. There's a lot of other stress signs that I also noticed. Like, one thing for me, I started to actually lose my hair. And it's funny, I started losing my hair, and I said to my mom, I think I have to get a new brand of ponytails. It's pulling my hair out. And she's like, you've been wearing ponytails since you were 4. There has to be another reason. And it really was the stress and the hormonal changes that my body was going through, that I was blind to eat, you know, whether I knew in my heart and didn't want to admit it, or I really just didn't know at that time, you know, probably a little bit of both. But these are the things when you, or someone, usually it comes from a friend or a family member, says, this isn't you. What do you mean you're not hanging out this weekend? What do you mean you can't, you know, go to work? Why are you taking that extra day off from work? When family members start to reach out and say to you, this isn't you, that should be a good sign for anybody, male or female. Something's not right here, so that you can catch it, you know, before it spirals too far out of control.
And I think it's important just to reiterate that oftentimes we don't think that that's something that could stem from running. You
Right.
know, running to some is that thing you had to do in other sports when you got in trouble. And then to some of us, running is something that we, you know, just thoroughly enjoy. And like you said, it doesn't define who you are. You know, it's something that you enjoy being able to get out and do. And when that starts to work against everything else in your life, it's like any other addiction. It's like any other thing that creates a downward spiral. Would you say, though, for you, that was probably the lowest point as a runner, as an athlete?
Yeah, yes, I would say that was the lowest point for sure. And there were a lot of things. My mom and I are very, very close. I've never fought with her in my entire life, really, until this point. And I would fight with her about, if she, you know, she would offer to make eggs for me, and I was mad that she put too much butter in it. I mean, I blew up at her about things like that. And that's just not me. That would never have happened. And it really, my sister actually had to say to me, listen, something's not right here. You know, what's going on? And unfortunately, yes, it took a stress fracture for me to really admit it. But while achievement wise, it was my fastest races, I had the best workouts in my life, I was doing brick workouts for triathlon training, blowing people out of the water, but I wasn't doing it in a healthy way. Had I been healthier, those same achievements could have been reached, just in a more well-rounded way.
Now, were you already in school for physical therapy at that point, or was this post school?
Yeah,
or?
this was after PT, right before I started, probably 6 months to a year before I started working at Custom.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tim, before I kind of switch over to you for a second, I just want to remind everybody, if you have the chat window open, Greg was kind enough to put up the IG handles for both Tim and Kathleen and myself, also for Custom Performance. But if you have any questions, anything that we want to incorporate into the conversation tonight, don't be shy. Feel free to throw those questions up there as we continue the conversation, and we'll get to as many as we can before our time is up this evening. Tim, just kind of building upon what Kathleen was talking about, you know, again, both of you are so lovely to be so open and transparent. It's not an easy thing for folks to do. And to talk about those low moments, we talked about you and that addiction to training and how you were training. At which point did you break?
July, I mean, the breaking point mentally probably happened in July last year. The actual knowledge of breaking was August 1st, 2019. And that was actually, I remember I called and, I called my dad one morning on my way to work, and I woke up that night, screamed because my leg hurt so bad, and I'd never felt something like that. And I was like, whatever, I'll go to work. I'm kind of a glutton for pain, which follows suit with every other issue I have. Or not issue, but with every other quality I have. I'll say that word. It's a better way to phrase it. And I remember I called him, and I was like, for lack of better terms, it's like, what do you know? It's not his field of work. He was like, go to a doctor. And, that was, I think at that moment, even before I went to the doctor, I was like, ooh, in the family I grew up in, it was, parents had a good take on what most things were. And this one was not covered by the parents. So I had to go to a doctor, and, immediately I went to HSS, great, and actually, no, before that, I walked into Custom, actually, and Wendy goes, what are you doing on 2 feet? I'll never forget that. And I'm not mad at that, Wendy. She was like, you have a stress fracture. I was like, got it. Okay, next. And I went in on 2 feet, came out, and went back to Custom and got myself a pair of crutches for 3 months.
And and the build was actually, just to tag on something with Wendy. That's part of the reason why Wendy and the team at Custom are so great, because it's in some situations, especially for some of us, it's tough love. And it's why are you doing this? You need to be doing this. Mm-hmm. And that's also why they are such valuable assets for all of us in the running community, because they do remind us to be smart and to do the right things. Where exactly was your stress fracture?
I had a stress fracture in the femoral neck. And I knew I had studied some in college of anatomy and physiology, and I had a very good understanding that femoral neck is not a bone you want to have any sort of issues with. And yeah, I was like, there was a part of me that was, it's like, man, if only they could have said femur, I probably would have, it's probably better they said femoral neck, because if it said femur, I might have still tried to do stuff, just with nature. But, knowing it was the femoral neck was, I really didn't want a hip replacement before 30.
No, and you and I, and this is something we've talked about, certainly, you and I actually had the exact same stress fracture.
Yeah.
Which is a case study in and of itself, because we are both of different ages, handsome. We're both handsome fellows, of course, but
thank you.
But of different ages and different types of athletes, different types of runners. But for both of us to have the exact same stress fracture, Kathleen's probably already working on some type of dissertation about this. We haven't read it yet. We haven't had a chance to prove it, but it is something interesting to think about. For you though, this is that low point. You've been training, and then you literally broke. All of that combined, you broke. Once you realized, hey, I have to make a change, what were those next steps, aside from getting that pair of crutches and saying, okay, it looks like I'm going to be on these crutches for 6 weeks? Was it that day that you said, I got to make a change, or was that like a slow, is it still a work in progress? I mean, I think that's fair to ask as well.
Yeah. Immediately, I mean, there was just a bit of, because of course there was, right away, I had to go get an MRI and whatnot, and didn't have results, but everybody told me it was. So there was a little bit of like, this glimmer of hope, like, oh, maybe I've just torn something. I'll be running, because, I was signed up for, at the time, the New York City Marathon that fall. And, there was this part of me that was like, I'm going to run it, whatever it takes still. And then I think it was probably a month in, when it still hurt and I was still on crutches, that I kind of realized, I was like, hold on. And I think it took a few conversations with a few different people to be like, is running non-professionally for fun with your friends and, competing against your own times worth turning 45 and not being able to go hike a mountain if you want to. And I think that kind of stuck with me. I've enjoyed some trips I've taken with family and friends of like non-running activities, and kind of it took about 4 weeks to really brand that into my brain that I'm honestly probably going to forget whatever my PRs are, when I'm 45 or 50. I don't know. When do you start forgetting them, Stephen? I'm sorry, too far. But I'm going to start to forget them, at some point. I'll be 60 and I won't care what I ran at 25, So I just had, realizing I need to change the approach. And I mean, really sitting with Kathleen is, I've learned a lot. I learned, what I already knew, she reinforced the emotional, the mental, the social, and the psychological aspects of running. So it was, for lack of better terms, I'm grateful that I broke. I think it's something that, just like they say, you're rock bottom. It's like, I could venture down that road again, but taking this spring has been challenging. I have friends who are running fast, friends who are running far. And I've really kind of let Kathleen take a little more control, let some another coach take control of what I'm doing so that I'm not the one dictating all of it.
Well, you're definitely on the right path, and it goes back to the idea of not only running stronger but running smarter. And that's again, it's not an easy thing to kind of, sometimes it's not an easy pill to swallow, for lack of a better way to phrase it. But once you do, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities to you. And I know you and I have some plans to do a drive-by on one of the bridges here in New York at some point, so that we can at least socially distance, wave at each other. And I think we're both on hold right now for that. The screen I'm looking at has Kathleen in between us, and so it's the perfect view.
That's right.
That is good.
But Kathleen, two questions. One, I had a question come in here to me as well, but something I wanted to talk about just as a kind of a reminder. We talk about stress fractures, and you mentioned your stress fracture as well. And if you want to share where that was, that's fantastic to kind of give us an overview of that. But going back to the conversation we had with you and Dr. Rosen a few weeks ago, what causes that stress fracture to happen?
Yeah, so a lot of people that come in will say, I had a stress fracture at mile 13 of the marathon. No, that's not what happened. Your bone is constantly breaking and rebuilding, right? Your bone is constantly remodeling. So a fracture, a true fracture where you fall off a tree and you break your arm, happens in that moment. What happens with a stress fracture basically is your body is turning over molecules. And let's say, just for argument's sake, you need 100 molecules to make up your femur. Well, if you are overstressing that bone from too much impact, if you are under fueling protein, calcium, vitamin D, and a little fat cell that you need to make those, then you're not getting 100 molecules in to make up the 100 molecules that you're losing. That's how a stress fracture starts and develops over time. Because normally what happens is you don't start to feel the symptoms and you pull back. It's the middle of training. Your training is going well, speed's going well, so you just continue to build on it until it really becomes a fracture. So that's kind of the layman's explanation of a stress fracture. It happens over time under high stress.
And where was your stress fracture when you had a stress fracture?
So I had a tibial stress fracture. I've had twice, same side. One was, as I was saying before, during my best triathlon season. The other was actually after my New York City Marathon. And what I think is important with this that I kind of want to bring up, and Tim kind of spoke about it, is my second one was a year and a half after my lowest, we'll say, red ass point. That was, I had started to recover. I was really trying to work on smarter training, but unfortunately, because we do have this addictive, loving relationship for running, it's very easy to spiral back down or take steps down. It doesn't take away from the progress that you've made. It makes you a smarter runner because you know, hey, this isn't right. You know, I'm getting these signs. I've had these signs in the past, but unfortunately, it is something that sticks with you for much longer than you would expect.
Greg just put a question up as well, but I have another question that I wanted to get to. And what you said is so true. And Tim, to come back to you, because you threw a little side comment about my age in. Just so you know, when you get over 40, as you're running, you can actually hear those little molecules breaking. You'll start to hear those as you're running, but you just have to realize they're repairing themselves at the same time. So something for you to look forward to.
Good.
As you continue to age, young man. A question that came through though, Kathleen. The question had to do with setting a goal. So your thoughts on setting a very specific goal with a timeline. And the example that was given was to run, say, a sub-3 marathon by the 2020 New York City Marathon, which is just around the corner in November. What are your thoughts on that? Is that, something realistic? What are your thoughts on setting those kind of goals?
So when you look at goals and making SMART goals, you really have to think about what is my base, where am I now, and how long is this road going to be? So what I would say for somebody, a lot of times it's maybe it's your first marathon, or maybe you just started running a year ago. And if someone comes in with a goal that's too lofty, don't put a timeline on it. Maybe you can run a sub-3 in 2021, 2022, depending on where you are. So having someone that can really look at where you're coming from, your training as a whole, a coach, an athletic trainer, a physical therapist, having someone that can look at your whole story and tell you, listen, that's a great goal, but the more immediate goal should probably be X, Y, and Z. Everybody's goal here should be to be able to run at 85 years old, right? Like that is still my ultimate goal. I have plenty of goals along the way, but that's the ultimate goal. So there's nothing saying that you can't have building blocks and goals towards that bigger goal, just, stretch out your period of time.
I'll tell you, I know the Brooklyn Mile has been postponed this year. They're doing a very cool virtual Brooklyn Mile. The Brooklyn Running Company really found a unique way to do that. But I know when you line up for the Masters group or corral for the Brooklyn Mile, it's pretty awesome because there's some guys in that corral that are 65, 70, 75 years old. And I remember a couple of years ago, a few of them said, oh, we remember what it was like when we were in our early 40s. And I looked at the one guy and I said, you have no idea how much you inspire me. And he just looked at me and I said, I can only hope when I'm 75 that I'm lining up at the Masters Corral for the Brooklyn Mile. And he may or may not have beaten me. I don't know. I don't remember. Doesn't matter. We were having fun. A question that came through, two questions actually, and I'm going to kind of go to both of you for this. I think this would be an interesting question because Tim, you were talking a little bit about lifestyle and some things that you were doing right before, you had your stress fracture. We talk about stress and we talk about the physical act of running, hitting the pavement, the stress on our bones, but mental stress is also stress. Work stress is also stress. So how does mental stress affect bone stress? Kathleen, we can start with you, and then Tim, if you want to kind of build upon that, maybe just from personal experience, that'd be great.
Yeah, so stress is stress, right? It doesn't matter. Even work stress that's good, work stress that's bad, personal stress that's good, personal stress is stress. It doesn't matter. When we think about what it's doing to your bone health and just kind of the red S systems in general, stress is an extra hormone that needs to be made, right? So cortisol is a prime example. That's one of the more common stress hormones, but there's other stress hormones that need to be made. So again, if you have X amount of protein, X amount of carbs, you take your multivitamin and X amount of calcium, those four things at baseline keep you running. Well, now you're making this new hormone because you're up for promotion, but your dog died 2 weeks ago. Well, a new hormone needs to be made. That means it's going to take more of those other things that you would eat or take in at baseline. That's kind of how stress creeps in. And to my point before, these hormones and all these kind of liquids that create these feedback loops so your body can repair, this is happening when you're sleeping most of the time, because your body doesn't have to worry about doing other things, walking, running, answering the phone. You know, your brain isn't on to other things. So you need to make sure that if you are in a higher stress situation, you're getting more sleep to make all of those other hormones you need for body function. That never happens. We get less sleep as the stress increases. So now you're just teetering on this seesaw that's eventually going to break in a not so favorable way if you can't get a hold of the stress.
I read something recently in what I would consider a legit medical publication, because I know there's a lot of information out there and you have to kind of pick and choose, but it talked about stress and sleeping, and it said that there are people that just the idea of trying to get 8 hours of sleep creates unwanted stress. And so you end up getting 5 hours of sleep, even though you had tried to get 8 because you're so stressed about trying to get 8. And it is crazy how these little blocks can just build and build and build and build and not in a good direction.
Yeah.
Tim, you know, just kind of touching on what Kathleen just really gave us an incredible overview on, were there times during that period for you where emotional stress and other types of stress definitely were playing a negative role in your overall health?
Yeah, 100%. At the time I was, you know, I think I was switching jobs / adding work to my schedule. And the nature of that was, you know, up at 5:30, you know, done at 9:30. While I may have had part of the time in the middle of the day, it was, you know, the amount of sleep I got significantly changed. So I had, you know, work stress was there. There was this thought in the back of my head that was like, oh, go to school, and that just like caused stress even thinking about going back to school, and that never evolved at the time, because it was causing more stress. And then just, you know, life stress. I mean, last summer was kind of like a roller coaster, for lack of better terms. You know, and then in the back of my head, something that I may not have mentioned to Kathleen once I broke was, you know, I never took time off between that race I had, and then I decided what I was going to do in the summer was train to, you know, PR in Chicago, which is an October race. So it's like, hey, why, you know, just keep stacking. And that was something in the back of my head that I was like, man, you have to, because I struggle with I'm better now, but running and realizing not every run or race has to be faster for it to be successful. So, you know, I was cranking it out up whatever hour I had to be and do it.
I like what you just said, and I think Jess Mulvold is still on, and she's such a positive force in the running community, not only for those of us who get to work with her and run with her, but as the Runner's World coach as well. And something that she says, I've always said that the race is the victory lap, and she always talks about we should concentrate on personal victories, PVs, as opposed to personal best, or, you know, what's your personal victory? And anytime, we had one of our young athletes on that was talking about how she didn't get to run Brooklyn today, but it's like Brooklyn's not going anywhere. You still got out and ran today. You had a personal victory today because you got out and moved. And I think that's something that more of us should take to heart. And for those of us who have discovered that love, we need to continue to share that and to give that back to the community as we do. Kathleen, a question for you. Dr. Andrew Ward has a question. I have to always give Andrew a shout out for helping me with my strength training and making me a little more gym confident, as we talk about. Tim does a good job at making me gym confident as well when he runs next to me with no shirt on, because I find that I didn't realize there are muscles in certain places, but that's a whole nother conversation for another Full Circle event. But Dr. Ward says, can you list some of the less obvious signs of Rett-S? So we talk about the big signs, but are there some less obvious signs that may be early warning signs that we're heading in that direction?
Yeah, so some interesting signs that could be signs of other things, so I'll put that out there, is getting into training, a sudden negative or decrease in training response. Most of the time, from what I have seen, this is not in a study anywhere, this is just from my experience, most of the time it's an increase in heart rate, during a training cycle, or in the middle of a training cycle when you've been conditioning your heart rate really well. Some of the other things can be respiratory rate that is just higher than it normally would be. One of the other things, which is dangerous in and of itself, is a change in your sweat response. So if you've been running all summer and you're like, oh yeah, I'm a heavy heavy sweater, and all of a sudden you're not a heavy sweater a few times in a row, same thing, that can be a sign. Your body is looking to pull for its other necessary things. When we think about the cardiovascular system in general, if you need protein or calcium, you need calcium for any muscle in your body to pump. So forget about the bones for a second. You need calcium for muscles to work. If your bones aren't getting enough and you're starting to get the start of a bone fracture feeling, but then you're also having some like weird heart palpitations, maybe during training or after, how scary is that maybe your heart's not getting enough calcium that it needs to pump? I mean, these are little signs. Again, they can be signs of other things. They should be checked out anyway, but sometimes you can find these things and you'll go to the doctor and they'll be like, that's kind of weird. That doesn't make sense. That's what happened when I started to lose my hair. I went to an endocrinologist and they said, yeah, your thyroid's a little off, but not really. And I really had to piece all of the things together to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, Jess just put up in the comments that that's an interesting fact that she didn't know that. And I was thinking, it's like Jess and I are sharing a brain at the moment, because I wouldn't have thought about calcium and muscle and heart as well. I always think calcium bone.
Right.
And especially as a vegetarian, I know when I had a stress fracture, I thought, well, I get enough calcium. I mean, I'm not a vegan, I'm a vegetarian. I eat more cheese than I eat enough cheese for half the people on this chat right now. But to think about the fact that other important parts of our body are utilizing calcium as well. That's definitely a really interesting nutritional conversation to have, which remind me to come back to that in just a few minutes, because there's a reason for that. Tim, I did have a question come through. Let me see if I can find it. It was just sent to me. So it's an anonymous question for you, Tim. Did you find that when you were out there just grinding day in and day out, you were pushing yourself toward that sub-3 and really just focusing on your training? Did you find that you were, and I think society lends itself for this to happen, did you find that you were comparing yourself to other runners, other athletes? Was there a need and a kind of a competitive edge that you felt like you had to have when it came to your training?
Yeah, and I think that's a twofold answer for me. With my job as a male working in the fitness industry, there's just, New York's cutthroat regardless what industry you're in, right? You go to the fitness industry and now there's a body image with it. If you don't look the part, and I'll be honest, I originally worked at this gym. I won't name them because I'll never go back there, but worked at a gym and I was like, these trainers don't look like a trainer. Why would someone pay them? So immediately, this was 5 years ago or something, and I think there's a physique. There's an image you should have if you work in this field, whether you like it or, I'm not saying this, but there's this perceived image of like people need to have it if they want to work in the field. And it's what everyone assumes, the stereotypical male, 6-pack, look defined, XYZ. And then you get into the New York City running scene, which is another absolute, train wreck. And I think that's really been a driving force for me the last year and a half, is to kind of like use the minimal, platform I have to kind of bring a little light that's like, everyone feels you need to do a marathon first. And I think that's like you're not a runner in New York if you're not running marathons. That was one thing that I realized, there's some of these big brands run 16-week programs in the city, and there's not one mention of like, hey, you guys could also run a 5K if you want. And I do respect, I love that Custom really pushes people to run any distance. And then on top of that, then there's the whole unicorn thing. Like, oh, so now you want to run a marathon? Well, guess what? That's not good enough. Now you've got to go qualify for Boston. And then you qualify for Boston, and while you're running the race, some guy's running in this triathlon hat. And you're like, well, shoot, now I've got to go do an Ironman. So there's just there's no ending to it. But I think it stems from I would say there's the sub 3, but also there's a physique component to it, and I don't struggle currently, but in the past that's been a huge problem for me as a male, and I think a lot of men don't talk about it. Is what do you look like? I think a lot of guys are like, oh yeah, it's fine, blah blah blah, and I could say for some of y'all maybe you don't care, but I think there's always a subconscious, at least in New York, of like your appearance to some degree may matter. And now we're getting into summer running, and like you said, I don't run with a shirt, but I reframed it a little bit. I feel like it's not healthy for me to be a presence without for lack of better terms. There's no point in people caring what you look like. It's like, what are you running? I like to tell people I coach, it's performance over physique. And that's one thing I keep in mind.
I'm going to quote you on that, because I think that really drives it home. It does come down to that. And of course, just when I tease you, it's out of love.
Oh,
Obviously, yeah. I would certainly run next to you without a shirt on myself. Again, we probably have two different physiques, but we're both, I think, pretty okay athletes. But you put the work in. You work very hard, and the wonderful thing about you is that you've learned from so many choices you made. You've become smarter and stronger because of that, and you continue to find ways to give that back to the community and the folks you meet. And that is something that's very, very admirable about you as a person, as a runner, and as an athlete. And folks who take your classes and train with you are very lucky to be able to take that in from you. As speaking of teammates, a question came up about, a lot of us are on teams here in New York. Some of us on this call do run with Streets 101, but there are folks joining us from the West Coast who may run with other teams, and other folks here in New York who run with other teams. Is there something as teammates, Kathleen, maybe that we can do a better job of if we say, oh, I noticed Steven he's a little moody, or he's a little, like, not necessarily to me, but if you start to notice maybe some of those early signs of red S with a teammate, what is a way we could kind of approach that, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think it's a great idea for people in general. If you're on a team and you don't have anyone talking about this, you should become the leader in talking about it. Not only is it good for your teammates to know, but it is a fairly new thing, especially in the male-female running world, that there's a lot of coaches that don't really know about this. And the important thing here is it can change how coaches coach, right? Mm-hmm. Before you come to practice, if someone's coming late to practice and they are in their work outfit and they are taking down bars and they say, oh, I didn't have lunch today, that coach needs to know, all right, wait a second, maybe we're going to do a totally different workout today. That's really, really important on all levels. It's important, with kids and youth especially, but with adults also. If a coach isn't aware of this problem, they could be doing more of a disservice to your training than helping you. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. So what I would say to people is, if it's not being talked about on your team, you should become the leader in making sure it's talked about. The more open the team is about it in general, the easier it's going to be for you to pull over to a friend and say, hey, do you want to talk about this? Is there something going on? Can I help you? That's a good way of starting, right? Instead of saying, dude, something's wrong with you. You yelled at me yesterday. Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay at home? Is everything okay? Eating habits, is work okay? That's the best way to kind of win someone into the conversation.
Well, and I think that's something, and I'll just put the idea out into the universe, but it's something that I think you've done such a great job at leading the charge of here in New York, and really making us aware, again, of what Red S is, knowing that all of us, we've experienced those symptoms. Maybe we just didn't know how to classify. We didn't know what it was. And so finding ways for those of us who do to go and to share that knowledge and share that information. And sounds like we just need to have a New York, or again, I'm going to take this thing global for you. And we're just going to do global running summits, and we're going to bring in coaches from around the world, and we're going to focus on these things. Mm-hmm. I have one more question that popped up in the chat, and then I have like 2 additional questions for the both of you. It's just after 8 o'clock, so I know we want to kind of start to wind things down. You mentioned that you had the stress fracture twice in the same area. And Kate has put a question up that said she trains fairly regularly for long distance. she had a tibia stress fracture. You know, what are signs to pay attention to as far as a possible recurrence of that? And because that's something too, you know, when you get a stress fracture, is there the potential for recurrence?
Yeah, so the number one sign of a stress fracture is history of a stress fracture.
Okay.
Unfortunately, in our Wendy, unfortunately in our world, and I can say, because I'm a little bit older than Tim, it was very regular for me as a young athlete, as a high school athlete. Every good athlete I knew had a history of a stress fracture. It was a rite of passage. It was a badge of honor. It's a cool thing. So having history of a stress fracture makes you this much more at risk for having a stress fracture. The other good thing to do is look back at that training cycle. Maybe it wasn't even really red ass, or you didn't totally downward spiral. Look back at that training cycle. Did the training cycle work for your life stress? Did it work for your schedule? What went well and what didn't go well? For any athlete, red ass or not, male or female, you should never have the exact same training cycle, 2 training cycles in a row. You have learned something. Something has evolved. Something has changed. Different time of year, new job, new family member, whatever it is. You have to modify, learn, and move on from that training cycle.
Mhm.
So don't just say, hey, this plan worked for these 18 weeks. I'm just going to cookie cutter put that into the next 18 weeks.
Right.
We're going to low, we're
Roll
as
from it.
humans, we're growing, we're evolving.
Absolutely.
The last thing for both of you really, and Tim, I'll start with you on this. You know, we've talked about the highs and lows tonight. We talked about those high moments for you. We talked about the low moments for you. We've talked about that journey and that trajectory from that low moment to where you are now. Have you rediscovered the fun in running? And what does that look like for your future as a runner?
Yeah, you know, and I think running with Streets was really, you know, a great way to get back in. I started running again. You know, I broke in July, started running in January, and I will be honest, the first month was miserable. It was dismal. There was this whole like, why do I only get to run 30 minutes at X pace? You know, I bartered with Kathleen, but you know, I think once I kind of looked at the bigger picture and I realized, you know, a PR really means rough. You know, I kind of hit what I wanted to. I set out in my running career already. I'm never going to be a pro. It's fine. So, you know, kind of finding ways to make it fun. And now that it's quarantine, it's like, I might be one of like, you know, the 5% who couldn't be happier that every race in 2020 is going to be canceled, because guess what? This was my rebuild year. So I'm doing just fine. And, you know, I think this spring I went out and I was supposed to do a long run to kind of see if I liked running again. And it was quarantine, so I went out for a solo little jog around for a few boroughs. And, you know, it was kind of put on the, you know, I did with a fundraiser and, you know, made it fun. Just not really caring, you know, I like goals. I put goals, but I've really quit making them so public. I don't think it's healthy for myself, and I don't think it's healthy for the community. And this is just my 2 cents quick, like, God forbid seeing one more person Strava, Garmin watch post or whatever when it's like we see them 7 days a week. You hit something and you're proud of it, awesome. I think like go for it, share it with the world. Guess what? We're all athletes. We're all training 4 to 7 days a week. I'm expecting that you're doing the work, you know? And so I really love when it's like, hey, let's just show up on race day and see if the work worked. You know, that was my 2 cents soapbox, so I'll get off it now.
No, I love it, and it's important, and it goes back to what we have talked about during this chat, and what we've talked about outside of this chat, which is rediscovering the fun, remembering why we get to do this. And as I always say, I don't think any of us will be breaking the tape anytime soon. I will tell you, Tim, though, when you get to the Masters division, I know you're still got a few years. I will tell you, there's that potential for the podium finishes. Maybe not in New York. New York's a very super competitive Masters division, but get outside of New York. I'll let you in on some secrets for sure. Also, I just want to brag on you. You know, Custom has had a huge impact on you as an athlete, and Kathleen, definitely a guide to both of us. But you are currently studying, getting your prereqs, if you will, so that you can continue to study physical therapy and eventually down the road earn your doctorate in physical therapy as well. So I just wanted to give you some congratulatory kudos and love, if you will,
Thank
because
you.
I know you're finishing up some finals this week, and we're excited to see where you go on that journey.
I appreciate
I'll come
it.
back to you in just a second because I think we have time. Kathleen, just turning over to you. Since I've known you, running's been fun for you. It's been a love-hate relationship maybe sometimes, but you've always managed to find the fun. What keeps you going forward when it comes to running? Like, where do you find that fun and that enjoyment?
It's definitely a love-hate, but I'm also kind of seeing, how life changes and running is still there for me, which is great. I moved out of the city and I'm enjoying running on trails. I'm enjoying that the trails slow me down so much that my husband and I are basically the same pace now. One of the amazing things that came out of my Red S journey, I have to say that I will never be as fast as I was then. Triathlon, 10K, half marathon, I'll probably never be as fast as I was then. But towards the end of that journey, my sister started running again, and she's now way faster than me. But I started that journey with her, and that has meant so much to me. So it's like a silver lining to my kind of crappy time in life. So yeah, just keep finding new ways to PR, right? I have a whole new PR goal, for the next year, and I'm excited about that. It won't be my fastest PR, but it's going to be a personal record, in a different way. So finding new ways to have goals. And again, I want to be the 84-year-old lady that all the 25-year-old kids are looking at. So that's the number one goal forever.
I'll tell you, from this age group, they're already looking at.
I don't remember that age group. It's been so long, Tim. And to go back to what Jess said, it's not the PRs and the PBs, it's the personal victories. So whatever it is when we get out there to move. Well, Tim, thank you so much for your honesty and for being such a wonderful person. We're lucky to have you in the running community here in New York. I'm lucky to call you a friend. And I appreciate your transparency and your openness tonight to discuss the highs and lows of running. Kathleen, I can't say enough nice things. Thank you for just always being such a valuable resource, a good friend, someone who points us in the right direction, gives us the tools we need. And as long as we take those tools, we tend to have success on the other side, which is also a good thing. But always appreciate your time. I'm sure at this point, your husband has built a whole additional wing onto the house. So
Yeah.
go enjoy that. One thing we didn't talk as much about tonight is nutrition. And the reason for that is I wanted to come back around to this. I would say I wanted to come full circle, but I'm trying not to make, well, we'll just go with it. I was trying to avoid making the obvious joke, but in 2 weeks, I think roughly around 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and you can keep in touch with us via social media channels. We are going to focus on nutrition, and we will have a special guest joining us. She's a dietitian from the Female Athlete Program at Boston Children's Hospital, specializing in Red S. So that's going to be a really in-depth and very, very informative discussion when it comes to talking about how nutrition plays in to a lot of the things we talked about tonight and the things we talked about with Dr. Rosen a couple of weeks ago. With that being said, folks, if you have ideas for these, we'd like to keep them going. It's a great way to stay in touch with the community. It's a great way to put information out there, to hear the feedback from you. If you have any questions, you can email info@nycustompt.com. Or feel free to send Kathleen or Tim or myself a note on Instagram, whatever's convenient, whatever's comfortable for you. Also, during this time, if you have any PT-related questions or, hey, I got a little pain in my leg while I'm running, be sure to reach out to the incredible team at Custom Performance. They're doing some wonderful things virtually. Kathleen has been a lifesaver to me for the last week and a half. I think I'm on the right path again, which is good. And they'll be back open soon enough for all of us to be able to go in and get the hands-on treatment as well. Virtual bread and butter, Tim coaches that at least 1 or 2 days a week. Greg's also on. He's another coach that looks after bread and butter for us, 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. And that's strength training for runners. Great way to get you mobile, kind of work on all the muscles you need to make you a stronger and smarter runner. Stay safe, stay healthy. And it was great having you join us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Cheers.
Thank you.